I tried to play on those words, and I titled the sermon today, Pour Forth, or March Forth. And the word pour forth came from the psalm that we read. Verse 2, it says, day to day pour forth speech. And the idea of the psalm was that God's nature, the world, and everything that we look at pour forth speech. Even though it does not have a voice, it proclaims God and His handiwork. And it points us to God. I know one of the things I love here in Minnesota is sunsets. I know I don't get up early enough in the morning to see sunrise. I heard those are beautiful also. But I love sunsets. I don't know about you, but all the purples and the reds and the other colors that shimmers. And as you look at that, you have an awe of the wonderful things that God has provided for us. And nature does indeed pour forth, proclaim forth God and His handiwork. And that's the first part of this psalm, is that it pours forth, it marches forth about God. And then the second scripture that we read is the Ten Commandments. And it goes along with the scripture that we read in Psalms, where it says, the law of the Lord is perfect. It goes on, the testimony of the Lord is sure. The precepts of the Lord are right. And as I read those, what we call Old Testament passages, Psalms and Exodus, a lot of us, especially as Christians today, at least I hear this all the time in the prison, they say we are New Testament Christians. All that Old Testament stuff doesn't apply to us anymore. We live our lives by grace through faith. And because of that, basically we can do anything we want, and God saves us by grace. And grace is sufficient, and grace solves it all. Unfortunately, if we read the whole Bible, we see that there is value in what we call the Ten Commandments. And if we really read it and realize that God's laws, God's commandment, not only is it perfect and right and sure and give wisdom to the fools such as I, but it's valuable. As a matter of fact, quite often as I read sometimes 11, the first part is about God, and the second part is our relationship with man. It's interesting that Jesus, in summing up what we call the Great Commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second is likewise, love your neighbor as you love yourself. He ended with these words, by this you have fulfilled the law and the prophets. We have fulfilled what? The law and the prophet. And that the law is still valuable. And let us look at it briefly this morning. The first 3, 4, depending on how you count it. It starts off, you shall have no other God. Reality is, the first 3 is about God, and if you read it from verse 1 through 11 is about God, and the others are real short verses. Don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't, steal, don't, have false testimony, don't covet. And then the one about your parents, honor thy mother and thy father. So the first 4 is our relationship with God. And the last 6 is about our relationship with our family and others. Isn't that what Jesus is saying? Fulfill the law and the prophet. Love God. Love your neighbor. As we look closely, though, at the Ten Commandments, it first says that God is the only God we should worship. Don't worship anything else. Things on the earth, in the sky, beneath the earth, in the sea. He goes on and lists all these things. Don't make any graven image. That the reality is, Jesus is right. We worship an invisible God. A God that we worship in spirit and truth. And yet at the same time, some of us are kind of torn for, The heavens declare his handiwork. We look at that beautiful sunset. We look at those wonderful things and we mistake it for God. Not realizing that, we sometimes substitute and make an image, something like God's nature and handiwork, and we make an image of it and substitute it for God. But God is saying, no, I'm an invisible God. As Jesus said to the woman at the well, those who worship him worship in what? Spirit and truth. And as we look at the Ten Commandments, we realize those first 4 is about our relationship with God. Worship God and God alone. Don't make any graven image. Don't use his name in vain. As we read it more carefully, we realize he goes on. He says, I'm a jealous God. I only want for you to worship me and me alone. Yet how many times do we have other things that take the place of God in our lives? Be it possessions, be it jobs, be it whatever we put in front of God. Or how about the Sabbath day? 7th day God working. But he says, keep a day holy that is dedicated to God. Once upon a time as a country, we used to have what we call blue laws. The last blue laws ended last year in Minnesota. Y'all remember when they start selling alcohol on Sunday? It was a blue law. And what it meant was there was a day that stores closed so that people were free to go where? To church. It's the Sabbath. It's the day of the Lord. And yet at the same time, what do we do on the Sabbath today? Many people don't, A, go to church, don't have anything to do with God, and B, we have made other things more important, be it sports, be it sleeping in, being it doing whatever. I mean, one of the worst things I've seen on Sunday morning is a person mowing their lawn and not going to church. We already, changed our laws and rules. We used to have the old 6 and 1. 6 days you work, 1 day you rest. Man came up with the 5 and 2. 5 days you work and 2 days you rest. 1 day to do all that work stuff and 1 day for the Lord. But even now we don't keep our Sabbath. We don't have a day set aside, a time and a place to come to worship God and to spend that day not on worldly things, but on God. And that's what David is writing. The law of the Lord is perfect. It's right. It's pure. We can look at the other part. Starts with our family. Honor thy mother and thy father. Isn't that where we learn most of our stuff anyway? At home. The good stuff, the bad stuff. In that society, they had to honor their parents, not because, they were, but as their parents got older and couldn't do certain work and stuff, they could not survive on their own. So it came with a promise. It says, if you honor them, and your days may be what? Long. And here's the reason why. If you take care of your parents, guess who is watching what you do? Your kids are. Your grandkids are. If you mistreat your parents, what do you think they will do with you? Oh, as my youngest daughter always tells me, Dad, you better be careful. I'm going to be picking your nursing home. How do we treat our elders is how we will be treated when we become old. And my child is right. She will be picking my nursing home. Obviously, as we deal with our fellow human beings, we shouldn't be lying on them, killing them, stealing from them, on and on. The laws, the precepts, the ideas that God communicates to us are indeed valuable. They are pure, they are perfect, they are right, they are clean, and they are true. You notice that it's the same idea, verse 7, 7b, 8, 8b, 9, 9b. We call it the law, the testimony, the precepts, the commandments, the fear, the ordinance of the Lord. It all have to do with God and God's ways. It ends towards the verse 10. It says, it's more to be desired than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter than honey. God's ways is more to be desired. He goes on, moreover, by them your servant is warned, in keeping them there is great reward. But who can discern their own errors? I know I can't. I have a blind spot. I mean, as a matter of fact, my wife says not only do I have one blind spot, I have a big wall. You know, and it doesn't matter which way I turn, it looks like I have a whole thing covering around me. I have lots of spots, and so do you. But who can discern? I can't. Thank be to God I have a wife that points out, you shouldn't do that, you couldn't say that. They might perceive it as. But if we follow the law of the Lord, not the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law, loving, because if you notice in that promise, God blessed from generation to generation those who love Him. That's what it comes down to, isn't it? And that's in the Ten Commandments. We missed that part. Those who love Him, God bless. It's a love relationship between us and God. The Ten Commandments is still valuable even today. As we go forth, as we march forth from this place, we can see that God's ways, God's law, is perfect. It's sure. It's true. It's pure. It's clean. And it is right. I hope that we go forth living God's law, loving God, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. The word of the Lord.